Hello, and welcome to another episode of the DevLab podcast. In this episode, we're joined by Petra Abbam, who is a Principal Responsible AI Manager at the BBC, and Philip Robinson, Head of Performance at the BBC's Product Group and Co-Chair of the BBC Embrace Staff Network. Together, they bring two unique but complementary perspectives on building inclusive, forward-thinking cultures within technology. Petra's path has taken her through the worlds of publishing, HR, and AI, all driven by a deep love for storytelling and curiosity about how things work. Philip's journey started with traditional tech foundations and evolved into a career focused on architecture, system thinking, and organizational culture. We'll explore what it really means to create inclusive environments, how the BBC approaches responsible innovation, and the role of generalists in a world that often rewards specialization. So before we get into it, firstly, Philip, Petra, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Looking forward to this.
Yeah. Great to have you with us. Petra, look, we're going to come to you first. I think a good place to start in any podcast is just to find out a bit more about our guests and your journey into technology. So your journey has taken you through a wide mix of industries, from book publishing to HR to AI. What are some of the key turning points in your career? And ultimately, how did you land in this kind of current role with the BBC?
Yeah. I actually started off quite traditionally. I started off, I trained as a computer scientist. I started off, my first job was in a graduate program, designing trading systems in an investment bank. So I was following the path. And I think, and then I got sidetracked. I think I got made redundant, and then I went traveling for a year and a half. And that, just going around the world, it really, and seeing the world, seeing different cultures, experiencing things that I hadn't before, it made me see sort of life in a different way. And I think that year and a half really taught me that I don't want to necessarily be driven by kind of, salary, all of this kind of thing. I wanted to do something that's meant something to me and I was passionate about. So I sort of promised myself after that I was never going to do a job that I wasn't that interested in, that I really had to like what I was doing, regardless of the pay, regardless of the industry. I had to be interested. I had to be excited. And so, and then I came back and became a meter reader. I think my whole thing is I'm driven by curiosity. And I think you mentioned that before. I think the thing that for me is I want to experience things. I want to experience as much as I can. I want to learn as much as I can. I want to try things. And I think I can take on a lot of risk. For me, I think I'm always thinking, like, what's the worst that could happen for me? And I guess I've been fortunate enough to not have to experience like the worst. And I feel like no matter what happens, I can always, even if I've absolutely hated a job, there's always been something that I can be like, okay, I met that person, or I heard that thing, and there's always something that sticks through me in life. So I think there's always something to be taken out of it. But anyway, I've moved to lots of different industries. I've worked in sort of advertising sales. I've run motorsport websites. I've ran a romance bookstore in Australia. I've been in sort of medical journal publishing, and And the thing that's always struck me, these are always things I've just been really interested in, whether it's like through personal hobbies, through just curiosity about an industry I wasn't experienced in or didn't know about. That's, I think, the thing that's always kept me going. Like, how can I learn? How can I develop? What can I get out of it? How can I experience different things I haven't experienced before?
Fantastic.
And so,
Go on, please do.
No, I think I just coming off, I can't remember what I think I've veered off and I've not answered all of the questions.
That's no problem at all. That's why we're here. Sometimes when we take those tangents, that's when we get into the really interesting points. But yeah, I think you really gave us a great description of that well-rounded experience you've had and all of that, those different kind of approaches you've taken, those different things that have interested you. What was it that really drew you to the BBC, and how did you end up in this kind of current role and remit that you have right now?
So I've been at the BBC for about 10 years or so. And BBC is one of those places, you grew up with it, it's part of your life and everything. But I never really thought I'd work here. But I remember I was working in sort of medical publishing, and I saw a role, and it was publishing. It was running the publishing for the proms and the orchestras and choirs. And I love music. And, I've always enjoyed the proms. And I looked and I thought, my God, this is perfect. I can't believe there's a job like this at the BBC that is like completely perfect for me. And, I mean, I think books are probably my favorite thing in the world. Reading, I love it. So publishing has always been something I've always really enjoyed. And I came into the BBC doing that. So I sort of did that for a few years at the BBC. Absolutely loved it. It's a great team. Every summer I still work with the proms team. I was there last night. So it's near and dear to my heart. But after a while, I was kind of like, well, this has been amazing, but what next? And I really enjoyed the BBC. And I didn't necessarily want to leave, but there wasn't anything else in the publishing space, for example, in the BBC. And then at the time, the BBC sponsored me to do a fellowship. So I spent a year out of the BBC doing a fellowship in the Core Leadership Fellowship, so Leaders in the Arts. And you had to think about, you could basically explore any aspect of leadership that you wanted. And my leadership I wasn't sure what to do, but it ended up being around sort of what does sort of equality, fairness, inclusion look like in a digital society. And that sort of got me into that whole space of thinking about sort of, algorithmic bias, responsibility, all that. What does that look like? And that was an amazing year. I met some great people. I experienced some really interesting things. And then I came back and was kind of like, what next? And anyway, I ended up just sort of maneuvering my way around the BBC, working in various areas. I worked in HR, I worked for the chairman, I worked for lots of different parts. I learned a lot about how the BBC works, and that was really helpful. But then after a while, like a couple of years ago, I went and I spoke to the sales director of product, and I had a conversation with her. I said, look, I really want to get back into tech. I miss working in technology, but also I'm really interested in what ethics and all that kind of stuff looks like. And then timing was amazing because she was just like, let me introduce you to somebody. They're about to build a team looking at responsible AI at the BBC. So that just worked out perfectly. And I think the thing is, this is a thing that I wanted to do like 5 years before, but never really found a space for it. But I kept interested, I kept talking. And then when it happened, I was ready and I sort of seized that moment. And that's how I got into it. So it's kind of like, I would say the thing there is like, never give up. If it doesn't work out, just keep trying, and you never know. And even just random conversations, this is, the power of a network. If I'd never had that conversation with her, I would never have known that team was being built. So it's just, talk to people, let them know what you care about, let them know what you're interested in. You never know, it might work.
100%. Look, fantastic. Yeah, great summary there of your career. And I'm really excited to delve into this as we, get into today's conversation a little bit more, because as you've touched on, the BBC is a really multifaceted organization, right? It's news, it's music, it's all sorts of different things. It means different things to different people. And so how the BBC leverages AI and the different use cases are probably, very broad compared to other organizations. So perhaps someone like yourself who comes in with that really broad, really, really well-rounded experience, I think that's going to help you immeasurably when it comes to trying to get your head around how the BBC can use AI in a responsible way. And I know that's something that we're going to delve into further on in today's conversation when we really get into that culture that's being built within the BBC. Before we do, Philip, let's turn to you now. If you could, give us a similar sort of summary. Obviously, you've gone through a slightly more traditional route, perhaps, but again, great to get some context on your career so far and how you ended up in your current role with the BBC.
Sure. Thanks. As I was listening to Petra chat there's a lot of synergy, a lot of connection points, but I guess we'll cover that throughout the podcast. So my career I'll go back to university. I actually did not intend to be in computer science and technology. I studied chemistry and computer science as my undergraduate. And my goal was to become a chemistry teacher. That was the real objective. I loved teaching. I loved chemistry. Computer science was kind of, I need some extra, let's say, credits to complete my degree. But once I left university, the sort of market for computer science in the late 90s was really rich. It was an era of the .com era. Startups were becoming a thing in technology. So there was just loads of opportunity to work in technology rather than teaching chemistry or working in a chemistry lab. So my first job was at an insurance company working as a systems analyst and programmer. And then I moved into the world of Java development when Java emerged as the main programming language. And that was a really exciting time to be part of Java growing up. But as I got into programming and software development, I discovered I had three real passions. One passion was was around analysis, that's systems analysis and data analysis, research, looking at the technology, the future of technology, but also architecture, looking at the development of systems and how different distributed systems are interrelated. I then went on to do a master's in distributed computing, which was all about architecture, research, and connectivity of systems. And that took me into doing further research, where I spent about 10 years working in the area of business systems research. And also we were looking at the topic of ubiquitous computing back in the early 2000s, where the exploration was, what if there's a future where everyone has their own personal mobile device? What would the world be like if that could actually happen? And here we are. And then, yeah, I had various roles over time, and I've been with the BBC now this is my 10th year. I've been with the BBC. I came to the BBC initially as a technologist, which we'll talk a bit about what that role means. But it's essentially a technical business analyst. Moved into the role of architecture, and currently I'm the head of performance in the product group.
Fantastic. Excellent. And yeah, as you say, what a whirlwind, from those kind of days in the late 90s through, the advent of DevOps for a start, right? And just deploying at a hell of a rate compared to when we first started, through to mobile. And then that spawned all this data that all of a sudden everyone's like, oh, we're producing all this data. Now we need to get a handle on this. And then, now the latest revolution, AI, which is obviously going to be a hot topic today. And it's just, yeah, so interesting to kind of gone on that journey, and I suppose seeing it from the other side of the fence to a lot of people.
Indeed.
Awesome. Cool. So look, next area I want to focus in is kind of this generalist, I guess, concept. I guess, as I mentioned in the introduction, a lot of the advice that technologists will get at university, things about is try to specialize. Once you've specialized, found a niche, that's you kind of sorted for life. But I guess with both of you haven't necessarily done that. You've kind of embraced different opportunities. You've embraced change in those different ways. So, Philip, maybe let's stick with you, and then Petra, it'd be great to get your opinion as well. How do you think embracing that generalism has kind of shaped your career path, and do you see it as, particular to the BBC in terms of, how useful it can be?
So sometimes generalism has its trade-offs. There's a point in time where I felt as though I needed to specialize, right? Because there was a certain demand in the market that for very specific niche skills, whether you're specializing in a particular platform, particular programming language, a particular sphere of computing. But over time, I learned to honor that skill set of being a generalist, because there are three things that generalism helps with. One is curiosity. If you are a generalist, you have to be curious. You have to be curious across a wide sphere of things, which means you have to be keeping up with technology. You have to be reading a lot. You have to be chatting a lot and networking and connecting with different people to understand the breadth of things, or, well, as wide a breadth that you can manage. The second sort of, I'll call this the virtue of being a generalist, is empathy, right? If you are a generalist, it means across the various functions of technology, whether it's data analysis, product management, delivery management, business analysis, software engineering, testing, QA, whatever. If you're generalizing, you have to have some empathy for those different roles and what the role that they play in the process of delivering software, delivering products, building systems. There has to be a level of empathy that allows you to engage with them. And quite often as generalists, you are in that role of linking people and things together, right? And then the third thing as a generalist, what that allows you to do is to navigate ambiguity and abstraction really well. So you become that person who's able to create an abstraction that helps to connect things, but also help to navigate when the messaging isn't quite clear as yet, when we're still at the stage of early exploration, when we don't have the data, but we just have an idea about something. And that's where generalists tend to shine, in being able to navigate ambiguity and create abstraction. Where that works well at the BBC is a very broad organization, many products, many services, many departments, many forms of content, many different formats. And it's really a place where the generalists can thrive. Of course, there's still a place for specialists, but there is a real space for journalists in the BBC, but also in the world.
Fantastic. And Petra, does that align to kind of your way of thinking, your experience, that kind of the empathy, the curiosity, the adaptability, I suppose, that comes with being a generalist?
I would, yeah, completely. I would say, especially that adaptability phase point of view. It's that whole thing about sort of kind and wicked learning environments. With kind environments where basically you've got like the rules, things happen predictably, all that kind of stuff. And that's really great for specialists, where you've got like the wicked learning environments where it's like things are constantly changing. Ambiguity, flexibility is the name of the game. You don't have all the information you need to sort of solve problems and stuff. There's uncertainty everywhere. And I think generalists, that's where you thrive, because you're used to sort of you've worked in different environments. You've basically got a broad range of experiences, so you can approach things from different sort of aspects. And I would say, especially in my current field, I think, like working in responsible AI, it's not necessarily a new field. It's been around for a long time, but it's really ramped up because people's sort of awareness and use of AI is ramped up exponentially over the last couple of years. So suddenly everything's changing rapidly. We're not sure where things are going to go. The technology is changing. People don't know how to use it. People do know how to use it. People aren't sure what the legalities are, all this kind of stuff. It's quite a wicked learning environment. And I think having that sort of diversity of experience, having sort of that sort of generalism has kind of really helps with that. And I think as we progress, I think, we are moving away from those sort of rigid frames where things are like the way they've always been and it's all rules based and things like that. And we are moving into more and more ambiguity, not just in technology, but in everything. And I feel like this is where the generalists are going to thrive. I mean, there'll always be a place for specialists, but it's like if you look at when they talk about transferable skills now, it's things like, ability to negotiate, ability to influence, work with teams, all of those kind of things that, they're the soft skills that you really get to learn when you're a generalist, because you've worked in so many different environments. You have empathy. You've experienced people's ways of thinking. You've not necessarily just always been, in one side of things, and you can see things. Like every time I go into an environment, I don't have like a set viewpoint. I don't see something from just one side because I've been on so many different sides. I'm always sort of, I think I also naturally sort of play like devil's advocate. It's that whole thing, like, even if there's an argument, even if there's people have got one way of thinking, I'm always thinking, what's the other side thinking? What are the other options? Because I think there's some studies that have shown that basically if everyone agrees on something, then you're never going to get a great answer. You should have that challenge. You should have that sort of pushback and stuff. And I think as a journalist, having that diversity of experience and thought, that comes naturally to you to challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think, we've touched on it a few times already. It feels like the pace of change is quickening, within the world of technology. So even if you are specialized, right? I mean, look, technology has never necessarily been the same as perhaps some other jobs where it's kind of a job for life, and for 30 years you can do the same thing. Like, that's just not true within any role within technology, because as you've already touched on, Philip, right, we've had the mobile computing revolution and all sorts of different revolutions in that respect. But certainly the last 2 years, the pace of change has really kind of seemed to amplify. And so I think even if you are specialized, being adaptable, being able to embrace change, being able to give new tools a chance, try new concepts, and not kind of being too set in your ways is increasingly an incredibly important skill for anyone working within technology. Before we come back to you, Philip, and kind of really get into culture, Petra, you gave us a great segue there. You'd already started to talk about the culture of AI that you're looking to build within the BBC. So let's get into that. So what does that actually look like in practice, and how do you embed ethics and values into this, really fast moving world where teams want to leverage, all the power of AI, but you have to do that in the right way, right?
If you could give me an answer to that, I would be much appreciative. because it is not easy and it's hard and it's complicated and it's a challenge every day because building a culture it's not something easy. It's and especially of building a culture of responsible use of AI. There's whole things about educating people about what AI is and getting them to understand its importance, all this kind of stuff. Building cultures takes years and years and years. We've had like 100 years at the BBC to build our editorial culture. And even that is, we're still developing and having to continue on that. So yeah, it's really complicated, and I think one of the big challenges is first of all, it's people understanding what AI is and what AI isn't, and how it impacts their lives, and what the implications of AI use is. And that's hard, because there's so much going on. I think the thing about trying to build a culture is there's so much change, as we've talked about earlier, so much change going on, and it's like prioritizing all the different change things to care about. It's everywhere. But the thing is, AI has got so many implications on use, not just in work, but in personal life. From your families, for your friends, for everyone around you. And I think that's the thing. It's to get people to understand what that means for them, and why it's important and why they should care, and also get into a place where they sort of naturally consider the implications of AI use. But I think that it can be really hard because it's not easy. It's quite some of it can be quite complicated, and some of it we don't actually even understand yet what the implications are and where things are going. And so yeah, I think it, there's a long work to go, but I think a lot of it is it's around education. It's around people understanding the implications, then consequences, unintended or not, of using AI, and also how it impacts.
Yeah, 100%. As you say, trying to predict all of the use cases, it's a complete guessing game. But actually getting people into that right mindset so that when they come across that use case, they approach it in the right way and they think about the implications and they don't just rush in head first, and maybe even just spending time to speak to yourself or other team members and making sure that it's a well thought out decision is probably half the battle, I'd imagine.
Yeah, we've got, I think at the BBC, what we have is we've got like AI principles that are basically, we've got like 9 AI principles, which are things like sort of accountability, human oversight, transparency and clear explanations, fairness. And so those kind of underpin, everything that we sort of do that are in AI. So basically, when you're using AI, make sure that it's fair, make sure that you're transparent, and when you need to be, make sure you're accountable for your use, all those kind of things. And it's kind of like, if nothing else, make sure that you can keep those principles at the core of everything you're doing. And so that's the thing. So as long as you sort of have those as your guiding star, it kind of can sort of help you, because again, you don't know, we can't figure out all the use cases that are going on. So that's when we kind of need this principles approach. And then we do have frameworks and things, and like teams like us and stuff that can give guidance and can help when people need to seek advice. And we've also built a lot of training in this space, help people understand sort of like editorial use of AI and sort of how some of the tools work, and then also just general principles of using AI and what's going on in the market. And we try and have like lots of sessions and sort of show people what other teams are doing, what other places outside the market are doing, and some of the conversations that are going in, and some of the conversations behind some of the decisions we make. Because I think with all of this, I think the thing is, it's like we're all learning. It's not an exact science, and a lot of it is quite subjective, as to whether something happens or doesn't, or it's yeah. So I'd say this is not a black and white. It's not black and white. There's a lot of grayness in this area, and I think that's that whole thing about sort of wicked learning environments. Some people aren't comfortable with the grayness. They like certainty. They like to know, is this okay or is this not? But again, with all of this sort of stuff, it depends, and I think that's sometimes hard for people to hear. It depends, and I think as attitudes change, as technology changes, as audience expectations change, like where we sort of draw the line changes. So it's like a constant iteration, constant evolving.
Yeah, no, really, really well said, really well put. Philip, we're going to come to you to discuss culture more broadly, but before we do, just wanted to see if you wanted to share anything on your experience of, AI being embedded into processes at the BBC. Have you experienced working with Petra or people in similar roles to her and kind of having these conversations yourself?
Yeah, well, quite a few years, and I agree with what Petra said in there, especially where things are in the gray. I think it's even when things are in the gray, people still need to make decisions, and people make decisions based on their assumptions and their perceptions. What are they assuming is right? What are they assuming is going to be rewarded and not otherwise called out or punished? And what are they perceiving as value within that space? And a few years back, I would have had some time doing an analysis of automation. Are there parts of our workflows within the BBC that we can automate with the sort of early AI, ML, machine learning services that were emerging, whether it was speech to text? We looked at, could we use speech to text for sort of subtitles? Also the other way around as well, capturing notes from conversations. And there was really a mixture there of people. You had people who were really early adopters and just wanting to use those services and those solutions more and more. But then you had people that were very sort of hesitant and asking, well, where's the information come from and where's the information going? Right. And that's always the challenge. The area of disinformation, that was really disinformation and misinformation. Those were really big topics in an organization like the BBC, where truth is sort of our anchor for everything. The fact that if we incorporate AI tools and machine learning into our workflows and into our ways of working, the fact that we could be exposing ourselves to be either producers of disinformation and misinformation, or having our content interweaved into that work, this was very problematic. So people might tend to look at the BBC and say the BBC is very slow to adopt technology. Slow and cautious are two different things. The BBC is quite a cautious organization, and that's because of that real public service remit.
Yeah, 100% makes total sense. And thanks for sharing. That additional context there definitely adds to the discussion. Like I said, we're going to focus, I suppose, on what people would more traditionally think of as culture, right? Not necessarily an AI-led culture, but the general more culture within engineering and the broader teams within the BBC. So, could you walk us through what cultural experimentation looks like in practice? And I guess alongside that, you've also worked on supporting communities across the organization. Like, how do these pieces connect in terms of the culture and the communities?
So this is really the area of work I'm most excited about at the moment. And again, it's that sort of generalist thing, because when you speak about culture, that's a very social area. That's not technology. That's not computer science anymore. But the key there is relationship, right? Relationship is kind of almost the system connection between looking at culture and looking at technology. And before we can talk about culture experiments or changing culture, we have to have some sense of what do we really mean by culture. And if we look at culture as its component parts, we understand culture as the language, the things we say and how we speak, and the practices of an organization. And the practices could involve principles, could involve processes, could involve rituals and routines. So practices is just the way we are, our way of being, right? And that's what culture, that's how we see culture. So when we talk about culture experiences, experiments, when we talk about culture experiments, we are looking at either the exploration and understanding of our language and our practices on people's perceptions, assumptions, behaviors, and experiences, or we're looking at validating, if we change language, if we change practice, what effect does that have on people's perceptions and assumptions that manifest through their behaviors and the experiences that they report. So you can get that sense of there's a really structured approach to experimenting here. We are going to make a change to language, whether that's in how we talk about our strategy, how we define our structure, how we refer to teams. Those are all language changes that we can make. How we write a policy, we can make a change. And then when we're doing the experiment, we're either just exploring the effect of it, or validating a hypothesis about that change in language or a change in practice as well, and the way that practice is put in place. And then if we're the sort of data that we would be gathering would be either systems data, which can be a reflection of it can be a reflection of performance, which can be a reflection of behaviors that people might have. Suddenly, we might see people making decisions quickly. If people are making decisions quickly, it means your cycle time could be reducing. It means your wait times could be removed. You could have greater efficiency. So there's this real close interplay between culture and actually an operational performance, actually. And so if you have a rich culture and you're spotting the behaviors that are creating impediments in your operational path, you can actually do something about it. Well, or you can explore doing something about it within your culture. Do we need to change our language? Do we need to change our practices, our principles, our processes, our rituals, our routines? And because they're having a certain effect on the way people perceive the organization, the assumptions people are making about what they can do, what they cannot do, and ultimately people's behaviors and the experience they're having as colleagues in teams. And as individuals.
Fantastic. Excellent.
It's
Yeah, couldn't
fascinating.
agree more, right? By conducting this research, sorry, or this type of project, and really just being conscious and cognizant of how you're perceived and how you're framing yourself as an organization. As you say, you can get ahead of that. And where does community fit into that? Are the communities almost the building blocks to try and understand that perception?
Absolutely. So we see communities at four levels. So it's almost a little bit like imagine a funnel. It's kind of a funnel going, or an upside down pyramid, right? So at a very broadest level, we talk about communities of belonging, right? And communities of belonging are there to sort of motivate culture, right? And motivate who do we want to be? Who do we want to be within the BBC? How do we want to turn up? Right? So communities of belonging are where different groups of people might cluster. And this is not just clustering because of a sort of obvious attributes, right? It could be people are clustering around, different experiences that they've had. They've joined the organization at different times. There are various reasons that people come together. So we always start by looking at communities of belonging. But then we also have communities of interests where people are actually passionate about certain topics and so on. And communities of interest are where a lot of exploration will be done. Exploration of how are people feeling if we're around the topic of AI. What's the impact of that on the organization? What's the impact of creating a platform team, on people's behaviors and so on. And then we have communities of practice, which are more traditional when we talk about communities within product and technology. We do talk about communities of practice. And within communities of practice, that's where we validate ideas. But then we have communities of action, and communities of action remember, it's this sort of upside down pyramid. So there'll be smaller teams of people. Well, communities of action are actually closer to the teams who come together for a short period of time to test a prototype, test a hypothesis, test an idea, test a solution, build something. And then that community itself might disband or just share the results, the learnings wider in the overall organization. So communities are very much the way we try to work. And so there's a real tight coupling between sort of a relational way of interaction in communities and a type of culture that we want to have in the organization. That's a relational learning, experimentation culture as well.
Fantastic. No, I really, really like that broad approach to what community can mean, because I think it builds more bridges within the organization, right? You're not just talking about
Absolutely.
characteristics, you're talking about
Yeah.
you're talking about passion, talking about things that anyone could be interested in anything or passionate about anything. So you probably join more dots than when you really focus on culture from more of a characteristics level, whether that's be age or gender or whatever else it might be, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So it shifts from a world of, and And I hope we get some time to talk about diversity and inclusion,
Well,
because
absolutely, yeah.
that's a real exciting part of communities as well. But it means that we can start to shift from a world of pure categorization, because quite often when we think of communities, we see communities as categories of people, as clusters of people, as silos of people. And while that is useful for maybe joining an organization and connecting with people of like minds, it's not in the long run that healthy for the overall organization. The organization needs those communities to interact with each other and for intersectionality to occur. So with this broader view of communities, we're moving from categorization into connection. Connection becomes the sort of first order and primary way of seeing how people relate with each other. Not through categories. We can categorize as well, but actually through connection, commonalities. What do people have in common at a point in time? And that's a lot more flexible and dynamic way of creating communities than a strict categorization of people.
Fantastic. Excellent. Look, and Philip, you've helped us out with the segue this time, so let's stick with you. You mentioned the topic, right? Diversity, representation. So, what can tech organizations do to kind of move past surface level diversity and create space for real inclusion? And then just more broadly, what is your, how much weight do you put on the necessity for diversity and representation within an organization? And Petra will come to you afterwards.
Yeah, so one of the things I think, as you did share in the beginning, I'm also the co-chair of BBC Embrace, which is the staff network for Black, Asian, and lesser represented ethnicities within the BBC. And one of the things I'm finding is even within Embrace, loads of diversity as well, right? I think there's a real challenge for tech organizations and other organizations to change the narrative around diversity. Right now, we say diversity is our strength. This is quite a controversial thing I'm going to say. I don't believe that's true, right? Commonality is our strength. The things that you have in common as people, that's your strength as an organization. The more you can have, more commonalities you can find between different people is your strength, right? Where diversity is resilience, it's creativity, it's beauty, right? The strength is in the commonality. The strength is really finding those points of connection that people really not just see eye to eye, but are prepared to stand together on. But then it's the diversity that's framed by that commonality that allows you to build something that's more resilient, that's more flexible, that's more creative, that can be different from your competitors. That's the shift that tech organizations and other organizations, especially public service, need to make when they think about diversity and inclusion. Is that, yeah, diversity is our resilience, commonality is our strength.
Well, yeah, I really, really like that framing. I've never heard it framed in that way before. And yeah, I couldn't agree more. Petra, it'd be great to get your opinion on this matter as well.
Yeah, I think I have a slightly different perspective. I mean, I agree. I think commonality is definitely a strength. I would say for me, I think I feel like diversity is one of those words that has been thrown around a lot in the last sort of decade or so as like a bit of a badge of honor, but isn't actually real diversity. It's like diversity is okay as long as you agree with me. And it feels like that's the thing, and it feels like it kind of also gets sort of swept up, when it comes to diversity of opinion and things like that. It kind of gets swept up with like moral judgment and things. And to me, I feel like real sort of inclusion is to be able to, when you talk about that commonality that I was just talking about, it's that whole kind of commonality of sort of values, kind of like a bit of a respect. No matter what you think or who you are, let's all respect each other. Let's actually be able to disagree. Let's all come at it from different angles and different viewpoints and different beliefs. But that's okay, because we actually want to be able to share our perspectives, to be able to share that we're different and not feel that we have to hide it or that people attack it from us, no matter what side of the argument it comes from. And I think basically we're turning into, if you're on this side, you've got the moral high ground, so it's okay. Whereas anyone that doesn't agree with me has clearly got something wrong with them. And it's really quite depressing. And and I think we seem to just be surrounding ourselves with like-minded people, or they're not like-minded, but the people that aren't like-minded are quiet because it's the vocal majority. And so I'm very interested in sort of like diversity of thought, of thinking, of experience, and beliefs, and being able to voice that rather than being sort of feeling sidelined, or feeling that you can't say what you really think, because there's nothing worse than having to go underground. And yeah, and I think the great thing about the internet, with all of its flaws and everything like that, is that you can find like-minded people everywhere if you go searching. But sometimes that's not necessarily the best thing, because sometimes if you surround yourself with like-minded people, you're never going to sort of understand that sort of other's perspective. It's going back to that point that we said earlier about empathy. It's kind of, if you only walk in your shoes, only hear your story, you lose empathy. You can't see other people's side of the story. I think that's so important.
Yeah, I just want to come back on that. I definitely agree with that. That commonality quite often becomes a sort of broader thing. You almost have to step up in levels of abstraction sometimes to find commonality, and it usually ends up in, well, what are our shared values? What are our shared principles? Even if when we dive deeper into this topic area, we disagree, right? What are the behaviors that we are going to agree on? How we treat each other? And I agree so much with Petra there that the internet does offer that wonderful opportunity for us to find like-minded people, but it also provides an opportunity for challenging people as well, which has been misused to some extent. But it provides both of those. And if you look at the topic of AI and machine learning, the way machine learning works on from a statistical perspective, it is around commonality. It is around creating clusters and categorization of things that are so similar, that are statistically similar, that we can match them together. What if we start to look at ways of using AI to find connection across those clusters as well, where we're not just clustering language terms that are similar, or clustering a set of pixels that are similar to pictures in a data bank, but we're also doing another run where we're able to find the unseen connections, the easily ignored connections between things, and between people, and between opinions, and starting to surface those as well. I think there's a real opportunity there for bringing technology and sociology closer together in terms of how can we use the technology to give people prompts. Instead of us prompting the technology to do things, the technology is prompting us to behave in certain ways. Oh, ask this question. You've met this person. You're different. Ask them this question. Find this out about them. I think there's a real opportunity there if we shift from strictly looking at the categorization and the clustering of people and opinions.
Yeah, I really like that. I really like that. It made me, when you started saying that, I just suddenly started thinking of that whole 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon thing that used to go around, that basically that everyone is sort of all like people that act are connected to Kevin Bacon. And it's always that thing, like you go and my sisters do this all the time. They'll go on a trip and they'll come back and they'll go, I was in New Zealand and I met somebody, I was sitting next to them on the bus and I realized that they went to school with my next door neighbor. And I'm like, how did you even get there? And it's, so it's like, that's the thing. No matter where you go, we're all connected. We all have commonalities in ways that you just never would have thought about. And
absolutely. Yeah. And maybe it is nice that there's that serendipity experience of getting there, that, we don't want technology to accelerate everything. There's something nice about, okay, we're on a bus journey. It takes 5 hours to get to London from Manchester. Let's have a conversation. If you're on a bus, if you're on a train, it's 2 hours. Let's have a conversation and then find some things in common. I know the other day I was on a train to Glasgow, and the guy next to me, he was retired in his 70s and chatting, and he ended up being one of the initial programmers of MIDI. So he was from the US, and it was such a conversation. Myself, I'm into music as well. we just found all these commonalities. I was there, okay, this is interesting. Here I am, a middle-aged black man having a conversation with an elderly white man from the US, just on the same train to Glasgow. Yeah, and I think having those nice moments of unexpected connectivity is also exciting part of being human.
Fantastic. No, thank you so much to both. You've been a really refreshing approach, I think, to discussing diversity. Like, being frank, and to your point, Petra, we discuss diversity on a lot of these podcasts. It is a running theme across organizations, globally. And often it's a very similar discussion every time. And it's about, really highlighting the importance of diversity of opinion, and how, your background and your journey shapes you, and ultimately having different voices and different thought processes in the room is important. And I don't think anyone on this call is disputing that. Absolutely, that is a big part of it. But also then looking at the other side, and where can we find that common ground, and where can we draw those commonalities, I think is a really, really interesting way of looking at it. So no, thank you so much to both of you for sharing on that. We've got a couple more topics to cover before we wrap up today's pod. So the next area that I wanted to really focus on with both of you is just around kind of passion and curiosity beyond work. So Petra, maybe we can start with you on this one. Outside of your day-to-day roles, what are some of the personal passions or interests that inspire you? I feel like we already got some sneak peeks earlier in the pod, so I'm sure you'll be doubling down on some of that.
I would say, I would guess, I'd say all my friends and my family would sort of say, what doesn't interest me, I think would probably be a quick. I feel like I always have to have, it's like a thing for me. It's like subconsciously, but now it's a conscious thing that I always have to have at least one or two sort of majorly active hobbies or interests at any time. Whether it's, I did sort of Egyptian archaeology for like a few years, like courses and things like that, very into that. I'm always reading. Reading, I think, is a thing that's always followed me, everything about reading. And then like for a few years, I was, until recently, I was an official for UK athletics. I love sports, and and I love that sort of community sort of thing, the volunteering aspect of it and things. And yeah, I'd say it's all part of that whole curiosity. It's all part of that sort of storytelling, sort of seeing, and sort of I also really like seeing people sort of progress and learn, and that whole thing, being involved in that whole sort of athletics world, the officiating, like right from like the 5-year-olds all up through to the international. And it's so interesting and exciting sort of seeing people who you saw from like the age of 6 or 7 progress through the stages, and you see them move to different age groups, and then you see some of them drop off when they're sort of in their teen years, and some of them just go through to senior level and get really sort of great performances. So yeah, and that's like a really sort of interesting, it's quite exciting world that a lot of people don't I think they're finding it quite hard to get people sort of involved. I think nowadays with a lot of these things, there's just a lot of competition for people's time and interest and things like that. And so yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity to get involved in things, and yeah, there's just not enough time in life. But yeah, I've got many interests, and I'm curious.
For sure. Look, and I think you very much embody that persona we were talking about when we were talking about a generalist earlier, right? About curiosity and adaptability. You're clearly someone who will, if you're curious about something, you'll go find out about it. You won't sit there wondering about it. You'll go and actually, dive into it and find out about it. And I think I'm sure you'd agree that probably really, serves you very well in your role at the BBC, which, as we discussed, is so broad and wide ranging.
Yeah. Definitely.
Fantastic. Excellent. Philip, same question to you. Obviously, you mentioned music a little bit earlier in the pod. Is that...
Yeah, so there are quite a few things that I'm interested in. Recently, I've started doing woodwork, but I can't say I'm very good at it. But I'm always interested in making things with my hands as well. That's the thing. But there are 3 things I tend to be very passionate about. One is faith. The second is music, which I mentioned, and the third is poetry and literature. And I'll talk through those 3 things. So faith, I'm a Christian, but I'm also always very interested in people's beliefs and what drives people and the way they behave, why they believe what they behave, whether it's from their childhood, from their background, from experiences, or so on. I'm always always curious and interested in having those conversations with people of, yeah, what do you believe? Why do you believe it? Without judgment, right? So that's one of my main passions. And also challenging myself to understand why I believe what I believe and how it is it making me a better person, a better friend, a better father, better colleague, those sort of things. Second is music. Music is just my absolute thing. I'm surrounded by musical instruments in my office. There I have my keyboards, my guitars, djembes behind me. I just feel like music is life itself. Music is actually, I can't stop finding analogies for music and life, whether it's looking at rhythm, whether it's looking at harmony, it's looking at melody, it's looking at the cadence of things. There's just so much there. I can spend hours doing music, and the reward I get from doing music is doing more. Right. So it's really one of those passions for me. And then poetry is something I've started with maybe within the last 10 to 15 years. I never considered myself really much of a writer, but I do remember when I was 12 years old at high school, I wrote this very silly short story. It was kind of, having a bit of fun. You're 12, you're having some fun in English literature. And the English literature teacher searched for me throughout the entire school. And I thought I was in trouble because the English literature teacher was also the deputy headmaster of the school. So I thought I was in trouble. But when he found me, he said, "Hey, you need to be a writer. You are a writer." And he said, and he searched, and people told me he's been searching for you. And it always stuck with me that he said that. But it's only the last 10, 15 years that I started exploring writing outside of work. And I've written probably over 200 poems by now, none of them really properly published, but I'm exploring doing that. And the reason I enjoy poetry is there's a structure to it, very similar to software engineering. There's a relationality between parts of that structure. There are constraints that you need to put in place if you're writing a poem, whether that's a constraint of the rhythm, the number of sentences, the number of syllables that you're going to use. Yeah, I just find a lot of freedom and encouragement in writing poetry. So those are my three passions outside of work: faith, music, and poetry.
Fantastic.
No, I
Thank you so
just
much. Yeah,
that
absolutely.
just
Petra.
that story about your teacher just really struck something. It struck something in me, and I think it just made me think. No matter who we are or how little effect or how little we think we've touched somebody or deeply we think we've touched something, I feel like every person that's you've passed by in life has an effect on you and has
Absolutely.
left something with you, whether they realize it or not. Like, you may think that you've never sort of affected people, but even if you've only spent enough time, there's something that something that you did or said that will stay with people for years in ways that you never expected. I always think that's really sort of surprising. I think I was on LinkedIn a few years ago and I got this message from somebody, and she was, I'm again New Zealand. She's like, I live in New Zealand. I don't know if you remember me. We went to New Mains Primary and stuff. And I remember when I first came to the UK, I was like 5 years old, and we were living in Glasgow, and we went to New Mains Primary. And me and my sister, we were there for 2 weeks. No, 2 months. 2 months. I don't remember anything about it apart from school uniform. I don't remember anyone that was there. 30 years later, she reached out. She remembered my name. I don't even know this person. She remembered my name and she goes, "I've always remembered you."
Amazing.
And it's things like that. And it's just like, my mind was blown. I was just like, how does she even remember me and remembers me enough to actually go looking for me? And you just have an effect on people that you just don't even realize.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that just speaks to who we are as human beings, as a species. We are just creatures of story. We're creatures of relationship, and we're creatures of pattern. No, those three things just, I mean, there are many more things that we are as human beings, but those three things, they always kind of show up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it speaks to something else. I think a lot of people broadly, but certainly technologists, are quite generous with their time, right? And if someone does reach out to you on LinkedIn with a question, maybe, and we're going to get into, to round things out, some advice to more junior people out there. So maybe this might be something to touch on, but someone reaches out to you with a simple question, might take you, 2 minutes, 3 minutes to answer it. That to both of your points, could be something that's so poignant to that person and has a real impact for a short trade-off of your time. And I think another thing that really stands out from this podcast today, and I think something that I would like, people out there to take away, and I apologize if I'm stealing anyone's thunder here, is just like, don't put yourself in a box or feel like you're defined by your career. Your career is your career, and you should enjoy your career, because ultimately you're going to do a lot of it and you're going to spend a lot of your time on it. So make sure it's something you do enjoy, but it doesn't define you as a person. We have different identities, we have different interests, like all of the diverse different things you both have done in your life, or the passions you have, or the ways you spend your time. We can be so much more than a software engineer or a project manager. So anyone out there younger thinking about, is this the right path for me? You can have multiple paths, and this might be your path for now, and that path might change or diverge, and you can do more than one thing at once. And I think that's a really powerful message for anyone out there.
Yeah, I agree with that. You haven't stolen my thunder. There's enough sky
Okay.
for us all.
Excellent. Well, look, let's get into that final topic then. Anyone out there thinking about their first move into technology, thinking about making those first steps, what advice would you give to them? And let's go on.
I think these days this is the advice I've given my kids, actually, who are teenagers, is they've seen me working in technology, and I've suggested to them, yeah, technology is a great place to work, but today, especially the state of technology, add a bit of sociology to it. Really don't just understand technology, the bits and bytes, but understand the relationship between people, and the relationship between systems, or whether we're talking about connectivity and information transfer. We can also learn a lot about the relationship between people and communities and communication, and being able to look at both of those worlds side by side and in relation with each other. I think that's the powerful way to step in to the tech of the future. I think if you try to go into tech without understanding sociology and without understanding people, I think you'll find it very hard to have a successful, well, it depends on how you define success, but have a career with loads of opportunity.
Yeah, really well said. Petra, same question to you. If someone's thinking about moving into the world of technology, perhaps they're not someone who typically feels like they fit that tech mold, what sort of advice would you be giving to them?
I would say it's interesting because I agree with what Phil said, but I would also say, though, that what is technology? Like, what is working in technology now?
Nice.
20, 30 years ago, you could quite easily see what working in technology was. Now technology is everywhere and underpins everything. I would say, for me, I think starting off my career in technology really served me well. Like, even when I went into spaces that weren't technology spaces, just because of the way that the world was shifting, that everything was underpinned by technology, and having that kind of interest and sort of background in it just meant that I was able to pick up new technology. I could have an interest. I could bring things in. I could. But I think the thing is, though, I don't think you're going to ever be able to in the future work away from technology. I think every roles and roles are going to be more embedded with it. So it's kind of, yeah, it is definitely thinking about that sort of social aspect of it. Um, and I think a lot of what we're finding, like especially like with AI, when we're grappling with some of these things and talking about consequences, unintended or not, a lot of the things that I'm finding when I'm working with AI and responsible AI is that a lot of the issues and challenges and opportunities that aren't AI issues, the societal issues. It's
Yeah.
really, who do we want to be a society? We're kind of wrapping all around AI, but it's actually not. It's nothing to do with AI. It's society. It's who we are as humans, who we want to be, what our values are. What is fairness as a human? Fairness isn't an AI thing. It's a human thing. What does
Yeah.
bias look like? What does accountability look like? These are human values. But we tend to like conflate them all with technology and AI and things. It's got nothing to do with it. So I kind of think it's always really regardless of where you end up working, because let's face it, people are going to be working till they're 70 or 80 by the time things go. So you could potentially have many, many, many careers. Just I would say wherever you work, what is your North Star? What are your values? What is it that basically who is it that you want to be, and what is important to you? And that, I think, as long as you kind of understand that for yourself, that's going to serve you well in any career.
I just want to add to what Petra was saying there about that relationship between technology and society, and the fact that we can't get away from technology. And technology is kind of three things. One, it's an enabler, right? We can see that as part of the relationship with society and people, but it's also a reflector, right? It's also a reflector of human values, human behaviors, human relationships. And then thirdly, it's an amplifier as well of human values, human behaviors. So if society is full of discrimination, racism, sexism, that gets amplified, that gets enabled, and that gets reflected in technology as well, in the systems that we are building. So we really have to be sort of focused on the problems that we are solving, but also doing that sort of feedback loop of, and if we make this change in the technology, what's driving that change? Where's that need coming from? The sort of capabilities that technology is creating, what effect is that having on the way people behave towards each other, towards themselves, and towards the planet as well? So yeah, there's that real state of, we can't avoid technology. We have to understand those relationships that it has with us as people and with our planet.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it brings to mind the kind of, it's an old story now, but the kind of initial crack Amazon tried to have at creating an AI, ML powered hiring bot, and they essentially fed it all of the data on the engineers in Silicon Valley, and the bot churned out, oh, the perfect person to hire for these roles are white males in their 30s to 50s. And it's like, well, yeah, because you've trained it on the existing data. You've allowed that existing bias to creep into the system, as opposed to thinking about the skills and responsibilities for the role. You've fed it characteristics, and it's churned out those results.
That's it.
Yeah, it's only a tool, right? And it's how we use it. 100%. Look, this has been a fascinating conversation today. I really wish we had more time to keep going. Before we do wrap up, is there anything at all either of you didn't get the chance to mention that you did want to drop in just before we wrap up on the pod?
Yeah, I guess
go on, Phil.
We're here representing the BBC, and I just want to be an advocate for the BBC as a place to work for anyone from any background. I know it's an organization that's constantly challenged, but and you will find different experiences, you'll find different people, you'll find different perceptions within the BBC. I'm sure there are other organizations that can also make that claim, but I can only speak from my experience.
I'd say the BBC is definitely, it's more than people think it is. I would say, I mean, I've been here for 10 years and I'm still uncovering areas of the BBC that I never knew anything about.
Yeah.
It's like an iceberg. What everyone sees on the surface is only just the tip of it. And I've been here 10 years. I'm on my 7th role. There's so many opportunities here. You can try so many different things. And it's not even just about the day job. There are so many things like, the staff networks, there's lots of ways you can get involved, and it's a really fulfilling place to work. And I think the thing about the BBC as well, it's the people that work here. I think that makes it, the organization it is. You have some really great relationships. So yeah.
Excellent. Look, very, very well summarized. You've saved me a job, both of you there, because I think that's a great outro, great way to summarize today's pod. Look, we've covered a lot of ground. I hope everyone out there listening in has really enjoyed it. So all that leaves me to do is just say thank you to the both of you for joining us today. As I said, you've been great speakers, great guests.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the conversation.
Fantastic. And look, thanks to everyone out there listening in as ever. Please do like, subscribe, share the podcast within your network. We'll be back with another episode in the coming weeks. So yeah, we'll see you all soon.
Thank you.